Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, it's great to meet you. I'm Stella and I love making miniatures for my Barbie's dollhouse using mostly cardstock. In today's video, I'll show you how to make this miniature's cool desk, chair, and whiteboard set for your dolls, and as always, I have free printable templates to help you make your own version. You'll find all the info and a download link in the video, so now let's get started. To make the legs of our miniature desk, we'll start by cutting this part 3 or 4 times and we'll glue all the layers together until we have a piece that's about 2 mm thick. And as usual, I suggest using cardstock from old packaging for this, since it's quite thick but easy to cut. You can use a cutting machine if you have one, or even just regular scissors or a pen knife, plus it's pretty much free and that's always good. Next, we'll cut this part a couple of times and we'll combine the 2 layers like this. We'll glue the resulting piece, which should be roughly 1 mm thick, to the previous one. We'll have to repeat this process to make a second identical piece. Then we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue 2 layers together like this. We'll attach the final pieces to the bases we prepared earlier this way, and we should end up with these 2 elements, identical but mirrored and roughly 4 mm thick. And this part is totally optional, but I like to spread a little bit of spackle along the edges to smooth them out and hide the layering. Next, we'll cut these little strips several times and we'll stack all the layers in 3 groups, each about 2 mm in thickness. At this point, we should have all these pieces ready. We'll simply have to combine them in this order. Next, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and once again we'll stack all the layers together. We'll repeat the same process for this part and for this one, which we'll need to make twice. All panels should be 2 mm thick and we'll assemble them like this. We'll glue the resulting piece to the one we prepared earlier this way. At this point, we can spray the desk legs with silver paint to give them a nice chrome finish. Next, we'll cut these 4 strips, and I recommend using a lightweight type of cardstock for this, since it's easier to bend. I used a piece that was already black, but if you don't have any, you can just use any other color and go over it with a marker. We'll glue the strips to the base of the desk legs this way. And finally, we'll coat them with clear nail polish to give them a bit of a shine. Next, we'll grab a small piece of metal wire and we'll bend it like this. And then like this. We'll glue the resulting little hook to the side of the desk this way. To make the desktop, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and yet again we'll stack all the layers together. The final piece should measure 2 mm in thickness. To make a wood finish, we'll start by covering the panel with a thick layer of acrylic gesso applied with a brush. And I find that square brushes with stiff bristles work best for this technique. This way, the brush strokes will give the appearance of a wood grain texture. Then we'll paint the entire surface brown, and my trick to get a nice wood grain color is to mix the paint with quite a bit of water. Then, while the paint is still wet, I remove some of it with either a clean brush or a piece of paper towel. This way we get those lighter streaks that make it look more realistic. And as always, I'll have a short list of all the supplies I used for this project, including the acrylic gesso and paint, linked in the description for you. Once the paint has dried, as always, I suggest placing the panel between 2 layers of parchment paper and then under something heavy like a big book for a few hours. This will flatten the cardstock and the parchment paper will absorb any leftover moisture in the paint, preventing the panels from bending over time. Then, to give the surface a nice shiny finish like polished wood, I like to add a thin coat of gloss varnish. It's totally optional, but I think it looks so much prettier this way. At this point, we can glue the desktop to the desk legs, and with the desk ready, we can move on to the next piece of our set, a tiny chair. We'll begin by cutting this part multiple times and we'll stack all the layers until we have a piece that's about 4 mm thick. We'll have to make a second identical piece and then we'll repeat the exact same process for this part and for this one. We should end up with these 6 pieces that we'll have to assemble like this. Just as we did for the desk, we'll paint the chair legs silver, and then we'll cover the base of the legs with these strips. Next, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and we'll stack all the layers so that we have a single panel that's around 2 mm thick. And if you're using my free printable template, a great tool to cut these rounded corners is a paper punch like this one. I used it all the time before I got my cutting machine. Speaking of which, just a little reminder, if you have a cutting machine like a Cricut, a Silhouette, or an M1 Ultra like mine, you can use my digital templates, which are available in my shop, linked in the description. We'll repeat the same for this part. And then we'll paint both panels with acrylic gesso first, then with brown acrylic, and lastly with a touch of gloss varnish. At this point, we can attach the panels to the chair's structure this way. And it's now time to start working on the next piece of our set, a whiteboard. We'll begin by cutting this part 2 or 3 times and we'll stack the layers together. The final panel should be around 1 mm thick. Next, we'll cut this part a few times and we'll glue all the layers together until we reach a thickness of 3 mm. We'll repeat this process to make 8 pieces in total and we'll glue them to the corners of the panel we've assembled earlier, this way. Next, we'll cut the strip 3 or 4 times and again we'll stack the layers together. We'll repeat this step to make 3 more bars, each about 2 mm thick. We'll have to do the same for this part, which we'll also need to make 4 times. We'll attach all the resulting bars to the base this way. And then we'll spray paint the finished piece to give it a chrome finish. When the paint is dry, we can color the corners black. And then we'll coat them with clear nail polish. Next, we'll cut this part twice, and for this one, we should use something like a glossy photo paper, a sheet of white plastic, or even just regular copy paper covered in clear tape. I went with the last one. We'll glue these layers onto the board like this. Then, to make the whiteboard legs, we'll start by cutting this part, and to speed things up, I used a mix of cardstock and plywood, but you can just use cardstock, as long as you stack enough layers to get a final piece that's about 3 mm thick. We'll cover it on one side with this part. Then we'll cut these 2 little rings. We'll glue them together. And finally, we'll attach them to the leg, aligned with the little hole at the top. We'll repeat the process to make a second identical piece, and both legs should be roughly 4 mm thick. Next, we'll cut the strip a few times and we'll glue all the layers in 2 groups, each about 3 mm thick. Then we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue the 2 sides together. We'll do the same for this part. And finally, we'll glue the 2 pieces together this way. At this point, we should have all these pieces ready. We'll have to assemble them like this. We'll paint the resulting structure with chrome paint. Then, to make the wheels, I glued these wooden bits onto a piece of cardstock and painted the whole thing black. I made 3 more wheels and glued them to the bottom of the whiteboard legs. And if you don't have beads on hand, you can cut the wheels out of cardstock, just stack enough layers to make them about 5 mm thick. I've included the shape in my template just in case. Next, we can add a few extra details using black paint and nail polish. At this point, we can attach the legs to the board using either metal wire or, even better, a couple of flathead eye pins. And just like that, the last element in our tiny back-to-school set is ready. As promised, here's the link to the free printable template, and if you enjoyed building this miniature classroom, you might want to make this matching bookshelf too. Isn't it perfect for showing off your tiny school books? And this is all for today's video. Until next time, bye!